Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire, or at least parts of them. We're going to continue today with talking about Stonewielder, and today we're talking about chapters 3 and 4. We're nearing the end of book 1, which is the sea, and we'll talk about chapters 5 and 6 tomorrow, so we'll see. I assume we'll be done if this continues by, let me think, Thursday, no, Wednesday next week, I guess. Sorry, I'm slow and not very smart. Anyway, let's get started on this, shall we? Well, see, it's getting cold, so the bottles don't even pop that well anymore. So I assume we'll be coming back to that cozy spot under my bed where I live in a couple of days or weeks, because yeah, we're reaching the low tens, if not less, degrees in Germany now. Anyway, cheers. So, first of all, let's talk about something that is super weird. Or not super weird, but maybe interesting. So, you remember in the video for, the opening, chapters 1 and 2 and the prologue, I got totally confused with the geography. Well, if you read the book in print or ebook or whatever, I assume you have a map, so you were probably wondering why I didn't understand that. Well, obviously I have the audiobook and I can't read maps, so that's sort of where the confusion comes from. And it's something that I rarely think about, but I figured it's probably an interesting aspect to maybe look at some point, how, stuff like geography that is super important in fantasy is perceived differently if you don't have maps. But maybe we'll go back to that in a different video at some point. Also, I just realized that I'm 25 subscribers away from reaching that magical number of 666 subscribers, and then we're going to do a long video about heavy metal and fantasy books. Just saying. So anyway, let's get into the real meat of the thing, chapters 3 and 4 of Stonewielder. And we learn a lot that was never fully explained before about the situation of both Fist and Corelry, because there's a difference. Obviously, Fist is the part that has been conquered by the Malazans, and the other part is still independent, the Empire of, I've forgotten the name, because names and stuff. But there's two things that I feel are important. One of them is that this is sort of still a stalemate. Another thing, and this is either I'm just really stupid at reading, which is possible, with me yesterday still having something of a cold. So why is he sitting out here in freezing temperatures in a t-shirt, you may ask? Well, he's an idiot, and that's why. The point is that I overlooked it, but the fact that no one has been in and out of Fist of the Malazans for forever, and the army there has basically taken over the land and become, independent in a way, and is something that that is only revealed in chapter 3, I think. So which makes all of the stuff that we've seen before much more understandable. The fact that the occupation is run in a very un-Malazan way, in a very I don't know, weirdly, even more corrupt way than other parts of the Malazan Empire, the way all of that works. So we get through bits and pieces, we get sort of the main picture of how the world, this part of the setting works, which once again is handled in the typical show don't tell kind of way, although there's obviously a bit of telling here when we have these informations dropped on us. But apart from the fact that we have one Malazan controlled or renegade Malazan controlled part, and a still completely independent part of the subcontinent and islands around that. Um, we also kind of learned that apparently the Corelry are not aware of the fact that those Malazans there, or at least some of them, were not aware of the fact that the Malazans they're dealing with are not actually like fully part of the Empire anymore. So it kind of explains why there is a lot of like crazy stuff going on, and we can also see how what we see oftentimes when it comes to colonizing that empires do. You oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes you have that point where like a local governor declares their independence. It's something that you've seen before in like even Roman history and whatnot, and the way those things work. Now, obviously, there's situations that make this possible, and the situation that we find ourselves in here is one of them, because you have the sea blockade that makes it more or less impossible for the Malazan Empire to get to Corel or Fist or back. So that's something that we'll keep in mind from now on. So let's look at more interesting things. One of those more interesting things is the opening of Chapter 3, where we meet, for the first time, the Malazan overlord of all of Fist. We have something of an almost Shakespearean, almost Macbeth-style situation there, where we have the Overlord clearly being insane at this point. Probably someone who usurped command. There may be guilt there. We'll see how all of that works out. But he also has at least problematic advisor with the guy. Is his name Usul? I hope not. I always forget names, but Usul would be a bit too Dooney for me. Anyway, who is a wizard who does weird, like a magician who does really weird. I should call him mage, right? Anyway, a mage who does blood magic in a very brutal way to get through that barrier that the Blessed Lady has apparently on the island. So we're starting to learn stuff about the setting that we haven't learned before, that being like magic that is not coming from that goddess, whatever that goddess is, whatever being that goddess is, doesn't work. Now this is something that is interesting from also from like a role-playing perspective, because it's something that you obviously find oftentimes in like parts of world settings or whatnot in role-playing games, like when your GM figures that he needs to actually take the mage's toys away for a while, you come up with a world idea why that is the case or not, and this may or may not be the basis for what is going on with the Blessed Lady here. We don't know, obviously, but it feels a bit like that. It's like, yeah, magic doesn't really work, and then you have your mages trying to figure out how to actually get back their magical powers. But yes, the whole way of the Overlord being mad, or falling even deeper into madness, is one of those things that may, and I want to call it like a trope, but like the slowly the usurper slowly going insane is something that has precedence in media, I would say. And it's portrayed in exactly that way, right? With the castle almost being empty, and he's sitting there alone, shivering and whatnot. So yeah, there's that. Another thing that we need to talk about or look at is where should we go? Continue. The whole idea of how the empire on Corel, I keep forgetting its name, but that part, the theocracy, how that is working, because we get hints. I mean, we got hints before that the theocracy is, or it's not actually a theocracy, but the religious part, the Church of Her Blessed Lady, is certainly doing something dark and sinister. Now, obviously, that's a trope, or not exactly a trope, but it's a theme that we have seen before. It's something that works really well, I think, in like a Western tradition, where we have the Catholic Church with all the stuff that was going on. So the idea of like, and is still going on, So the idea of especially, I don't know, child abuse or dark, sinister secrets, occult things that are behind that facade of holiness, that is something that we have had in media and in the public awareness. And I'm not sure if it works similar in like other parts of like the globe. So I'm not aware of like traditions of, say, in countries that have a more Buddhist tradition, that there is like this ongoing theme of something sinister going on in Buddhist monasteries. I don't know, but the West and Christianity, there certainly is a foundation to build on here, and to evoke like images just by having this kind of thing going on and just making sure that the religion is doing it. So that's something to see, I guess. Um, so what we can see here in general, though, is how Cam Esslemont has a different way of building up novels and building structuring them, because we get much more of an overview on the at least on the tactical level, an overview of the setting, who's doing what, and so forth. On political levels that we rarely see when Steven Erikson writes something. We don't. He doesn't do that this directly, and we saw that before in Return of the Crimson Guard. Probably, well, not so much in Night of Knives because it's so short, but we see it here again. We have like the whole structure laid out. The conflict is laid out for us to understand before he puts all those individual characters in to then play out whatever plot he has in mind. That being, we have the stalemate between those Malazan occupiers on Fist that are renegades. We have the religious empire on the rest of the archipelago. Archipelago. I'm not good today with language and stuff. Um, we then have in that whole thing, in the archipelago, we have that, and in Corel, we have the internal conflict, the religious one against the influx of other cults, the like severe crackdown and oppression and subjugation of any like foreign cult or anything that has to do with magic, apparently. That is one further conflict that is shown to us as a general thing. Another one is obviously the slow failing of the Corel Storm Guard, the chosen of the Storm Guard. They're being fewer and fewer. They don't get enough manpower. They don't got enough like funds to do their job, which is a problem because on the outside we have obviously that external threat of the Storm Riders. So overall, what we can see here is how, with what we saw yesterday in the prologue that is zooming in from like layer to layer, from one layer of time to the next layer of time, we here see the same. Once again, we can see how the world is built up to make all these conflicts make sense to us. So we have like as a reader, if we pay attention, and like me, what we get is that an overall view of how the lay of the land, and then we drop characters in there that have very personal motives to do whatever they will do, and we'll see how they will interact with all those different world conflicts and facets of the world, basically. And this is something that I would say differentiates Cam Esslemont's writing from Steven Erikson's writing, because Steven Erikson rarely zooms out to that point where you can see that overall conflict. In fact, this is basically part of what makes the Malazan Book of the Fallen work the way it does, that it takes until almost the end of those 10 books that you finally understand the main conflict. It takes basically, let me think, well, at least book 6, I would say, to get like an overall handle on what is going on. More like book 9 until you finally get like where they're actually going to. This is something that Cam Esslemont does differently for like every single individual novel. He lays out those overall themes and concepts and conflicts fairly early on, so I guess it may be easier to read those novels compared to the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because you always know where you are, in a way. At least it does it here in a very strict way. Not as obvious in Return of the Crimson Guard, and we know that a lot of people get confused by that one. So maybe maybe that's why people like Stonewielder more. So yeah, but I just felt that it's important to look at this and interesting to see how the overall tactical situation is very clear to everyone. So we basically see how that works out. There is that situation. The Malazan Sixth Army, who has gone basically rogue in Fist, will be punished. The Malazan Empire, now that the conflicts on the mainland have been solved, sorted out is what I wanted to say, and then I got confused with words. Sorted out. They are going to solve the Corel Fist problem once and for all, with sending a large force to break the Mare blockade, which has, in effect, made the whole peninsula, that whole subcontinent, whatever you want to call it, has basically locked it off from the rest of the world. They hire the Blue Moranth and will go there. They have no idea what's going on there. We'll see what will happen once we get there later on. And this is the other part, and we see that at the beginning of chapter 4, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. What we see here is two outside forces converging on our theater of war, or our setting. On the one side we have the Storm Riders, on the other side we have the Malazan Marines, like the Malazan fleet with the Blue Moranth that come from that other side, and attack, which is basically islands. So obviously they have to come from the sea. Now we come to the individual stuff, I would say. We come to the idea of, and this is once again a very classic structure that we have seen in novels before, not necessarily in fantasy novels, more in, say, crime fiction or other stuff like that, and science fiction as well. And this is the idea of that one crucial mistake and the unfinished business, right? What I mean by that is that something happened in the past. We don't know yet what it is. It'll probably be explained near the end of the novel, if at all, revealed. But a lot of the characters that we've met so far have unfinished business that is weighing them down, is holding those characters down. But that's sort of what we see here. They go, and so they have to return to Corel to solve that, to clear all of that up once and for all, which is why Rillish, who has that conflict with, what's his name, with Greymane, goes back, which is why Greymane goes back, which is why, so you see how all of that converges once again back there to finally, do something that wasn't done properly in the past. That's sort of what the kind of feeling we see. And once again, this makes this book accessible and readable in such a good way, because what we do see here is like things that we recognize from other books, from stories that we have read or movies that we have seen before, and that makes it easier to latch onto it. And we have like less of these individual stories. Another one of those individual stories is the one that I spoke about yesterday, obviously, which is the story of Bakun, the assessor. This one continues along, well-known paths, when we have that situation that he realizes that basically they've been onto him all the time. It is the abbot in the monastery that is behind all those, or at least connected to all those deaths that he has been investigating, even though he wasn't supposed to, or has been investigating in a way that he wasn't supposed to. When his documents get stolen and so forth, he's basically on his own, and then his old, not friend, like presumed not friend, but still friend, the guard captain actually tells him that that stuff is somewhere, so he has a chance to solve that moral wrong, once and for all. Which, once again, this is a classic. This is a classic that we've seen before, and I once again this makes it easy for us as readers to latch onto this in a way that it wasn't in, say, Return of the Crimson Guard. It is still, and this is vital to, I can't stress this enough, it is just done really well. Esslemont's prose is great. His characters are interesting. His characters are fascinating. He sprinkles in enough unique descriptions of things that are going on. His attention to detail when it comes to both customs and tactics, military stuff. All of that stuff is great, and I feel it's a bit closer to the fantasy genre, what we are used in other parts of the fantasy genre, that I feel it's easier to connect to that if you haven't read also stuff from other genres. So I feel like something like Stonewielder is a very accessible book for someone who has only read epic fantasy before, and because it is closer in a lot of ways to that. But Esslemont does it right, the way he describes boats. We're coming back to the whole ship thing, and this will be even more tomorrow, I think, when we talk about the coming sea battle. This guy knows his ships and his sea battles, and it's just incredibly good. Even today, the way he builds up these things in the Chorelry Theatre is just... It's a lot of fun to read, basically. That's what I'm trying to say here. So when I say that there's a lot of stuff in here that you can recognize from other readings, that's not to denigrate it at all. It's just it's why I think it is more accessible than, say, Return of the Crimson Guard, and in parts more accessible than, say, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, if you come from a classic fantasy background. So now let's look at another one of those things. The meeting of those old warlocks or witches or whatever they are at the beginning of chapter 4. The Coven meeting. Maybe that's because I just reread for the Discworld read along. We just read Weird Sisters, which has also a meeting of a coven. So I may just be more sensitive to that kind of thing, but the way he does that is once again a great subversion, right? With his usual touch of comedy that Cam Esslemont is really good at. When those elders, which are kind of weird, we don't know who they are yet, but those sorcerers, witches, warlocks, whatever, when they meet and cast the tiles to find out what is going in the future. This is a classic, your three witches on the heath, looking in the cauldron foretelling the future kind of thing. But it's once again done with these very quirky characters that are super absent-minded and all of that. So that's really cool to see the way he does that. It does the job. It kind of shows us what is going on. It gives us the larger picture, but it does it in a fun way that kind of subverts that trope of the wise people doing their the wise people in the background knowing everything. Yeah, they may know everything, but they're certainly also pretty fucking crazy, if that makes any sense. So that's something that I really, really liked about it. So let's check in with another few people that we need to check in. I never talked about Sooth and his crew yesterday, which is a problem, because, I'm an idiot. Anyway, Sith and his crew. This is another staple that we have seen a lot in the Malazan world, and certainly in Return of the Crimson Guard we had a similar plot line in a way. And that is the one that is our entry into a already dense setting with a lot of history. Through a new squad of soldiers, at least one or two characters like as our viewpoint character in there that will allow us to ride along if we want to and be drawn into the whole thing. In Return of the Crimson Guard, it was Sergeant Jampy, or was it named Nate? I think it was Nate at the beginning. I don't know, that dude, and the Coast Guard people, who then become sappers. This time around, it's Sooth, who becomes a soldier, which allows someone who is new to the setting, and you can obviously, and this is important, you can read all of those novels of the Malazan Empire. You can read those as standalones. You don't have to read them in series. I think it helps to read them in series, but if you just want to read one of them, each of them works. Probably Stonewielder more, like, better than most, I would say. But at the same time, we get a lot of, like, important, like, history kind of lessons in there with Sooth, when we have the whole idea of the dichotomy between, or the difference between warriors and soldiers. The idea of, like, why the organized Malazan Empire was able to crush the Dolhan's tribes with their warrior ethos versus, like, an organized army. That stuff is stuff that if you were a military historian or something like that, you would probably know because you studied that kind of stuff, but your average reader of whatever other fantasy probably is not aware of why these things, like, on a grander, like, history, archaeology, anthropology level often play out that way, why an organized force works in a different way or is more successful against individual champions, even though every one of those individual warriors may just be so much stronger. Which is when you have that whole idea of that the Malazan Empire, if they really wanted to, could crush the Segula. They don't, or I haven't so far. But yes, that's a warrior group, not exactly an army group. Although we'll see about that in Orb the Throne, I think. Anyway, my point is that this kind of group, with Sooth, while giving us once again the whole marine banter, the dynamics of a small group, because all the other people that we have here are not exactly like a group dynamic. We have more like a even either individuals like with Bakun or whatnot, or we have a small, like, drama of characters like at the Storm Wall. We're going to talk about them in a second. This is our group dynamic with the quirky Marines and the quirky soldiers that are kind of over exaggerated. It's like, yeah, your character is called Dim and he's extremely dim. It's like, that's, like, to a level that may just be unrealistic. And you have, Marines or soldiers, Malazan soldiers, I think they're all Marines in this case, but Malazan Marines are oftentimes, both in Stephen Erickson's writing and in Cam Esslemont's writing, over the top. Those are extremes, not always, but most of the time. The stupid people are really stupid, the smart people are really smart, the funny people are really funny, and the assholes are really assholes, sort of, in a way. They're a bit larger than life, which, hey, it's cool. And yeah, this is sort of like the continuation that we see there with Sooth going on there on the trail. He's smart enough while being in there for the wrong reasons, with which is his warrior ethos. He wants to prove himself. He wants to be a champion, basically. But he's learning. He's smart enough to listen to the right people, figure out stuff, and so forth. So he will probably become a more and more important character later on. We will see. Just wanted to point that out, that this is, like, very similar to the plot line that we had with Nate and Tinsmith and Hans and those people in Return of the Crimson Guard. All right, that bit. What else did we talk about yesterday? Well, Kiska searching for Taishren and doing it together with someone whom we, as veterans of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, have recognized. Because how many self-possessed, self-obsessed egomaniacs with 2 flails do we know? From 7 cities, that is. Yes, of course it's Leoman, and we have them on that quest, and we have one of those typical like people hating each other at the beginning, trying to come to grips with it because both of them are like very, self-obsessed in a way. We'll see where all of that is going. For now, it just runs along. So this is another thing that we have seen before, at least when with Cam Esslemont's writing, right? What he does is he has like a main story, which in this case is what is going on in Corel and Fist, and we have all these characters being drawn in there over time. And then he has other parts that seemingly not really connected to what is going on, that he just draws along from time to time, dropping in, that will lead to stuff in later novels. And the Kiska, Leoman, whatever, search for Teish is, so far at least, seemingly unconnected to all the Corel stuff. In a lesser way, this is also the case with the Blues and Shell and Crimson Guard plotline, although that will obviously change. Because we see them, like we had that situation at the beginning, when the trader from Corel comes to Stratum, and one of the Crimson Guard people hears that the champion at the wall is called Bars, and this is the next person we need to talk about, the Colo, Iron Bars, and whatnot situation. Now we have a group of those people, Crimson Guard people, being on their way to somewhere, rescuing a friend. So who may that friend be? But it's small bits and pieces here, them being just Crimson Guardsmen and super fucking awesome and whatnot. While at the same time we have obviously the whole plotline with Carlo and Iron Bars being the champion of the wall, being mistreated, obviously, because he's a slave. Let's not forget that. And Bars is a study in how you reduce a man or take away humanity by taking away their purpose, our purpose, that is, as humans, and robbing them on of our humanity, just like reducing them to one specific particular thing, whether they want to or not, which goes way beyond him just being a really good sword fighter. So he's like there to fight people, but that's what the wall does with all the people that are put there. They're put there for one thing and one thing alone, that is fighting. And while Iron Bars is fucking good at it, and Traveler was also fucking good at it, obviously. The point is that those people never chose it. Like, you can make your entire life about something, but it has to be your choice. If not, they take away all the things that make you a person. They dehumanize you, which is kinda what parts of our world right now do with people. If you're forced to, in your life, you're reduced to just performing at your job, and it's not a job that you really chose because it is your vocation, but it's a job that you are forced to because you need to eat and whatnot. This will slowly rob you of your humanity. And we see that with Bars in like a more direct and brutal way, but it is the same thing. Alright, let's talk a bit about the Chosen Ones and their thing, like the Night Watch plotline, if it were a Game of Thrones. But the point here is that what we need to understand is that the threat of the Storm Riders is real, and the Chosen of the Storm Guard, while doing something really terrible, which is using all those slaves as cannon fodder or fighters for them and whatnot, those people are still trying to do a good thing. It's one of those, like, how far will you go to achieve something good? That question that we've talked about yesterday is, like, does the good outweigh the evil? Because what we have here is individual slavery for those people, chained to the wall to fight Storm Riders. But if the Storm Riders take over the wall, they will just inundate and overrun the entire island, probably, and kill everyone. So, how evil is the Storm Guard? it's one of those questions that we'll need to talk about later on, again and again, because they come up again and again. Anyway, we just see how, that thing is slowly falling apart, and you have those true believers of the chosen ones who do, think they're doing a good job or doing something right and morally good through brutal means, with that rising threat that the whole thing may collapse because of lack of support from the hinterlands. Nothing really interesting going on there yet. There's hints of something at that tower. Remember I keep forgetting the name. That one tower on that island we had a short glimpse of. That will become interesting later on. But yeah. So 2 things before we leave for today. First of all, I've never spoken about how fucking awesome storm riders are. Like, the idea of having these creatures come out of the sea as ice wielding humans or whatever, similar to humans, attacking, that is just really fucking cool. The idea of, like, having people... I mean, have you ever been to, like, a sea coast that has, like, really high waves? I don't know, the Atlantic coast, for example. Especially, like, a rocky one, say, maybe even, like... For me, the one that comes to mind is Brittany, because that's sort of where I've been when it comes to the Atlantic. That's the kind of thing. You have these huge waves crashing against a rock, like piece of rock or whatever, and then you imagine just coming out of that wave, someone riding that wave sort of with and attacking you. That's just fucking insanely cool, is what I'm trying to say here. So let's just appreciate for a moment that this is really cool. Because what it does is something that, once again, I'm obviously not really comparing, but I'm using it to illustrate something here, something larger. What we see here is what also makes the White Walkers in Game of Thrones so scary, right? Because they are basically a force of nature, and as humans, we are always fighting forces of nature because we know, or we are usually deadly afraid of those, because those are things that we, so far, and unfortunately, we're kind of losing that respect by now, but the idea that frost, the level of frost that you can have, for example, is just super fucking scary what it can do. There's like, trees exploding because of frost in there, rocks exploding because of the frost, like it freezing. That's something that we as humans have no power over. So that's what makes it so unnatural. By just being natural, it makes it so scary. It's just so far beyond our control. Because, a dragon, like any kind of monster, as such, is scary, but it is controllable. It's like something you can kill. But this is a force of nature. You can't kill forces of nature. That's not how that works. So that's what makes the Storm Riders so cool, that they personify a force of nature, in a way. And obviously you have like elementals in your Dungeons and Dragons games, but the way they're portrayed, they're usually just like humans made out of, or humanoid made out of some form of element, earth, water, fire, whatever. But the Storm Riders are something else, because they're like a large army of them, basically. So that's interesting to look at. Alright, the final thing for today. Ivana, once again. This is another one of those, I spoke yesterday about that person who has left behind their like sullied past and is now, through external circumstances, forced back into that, which fits that overall theme of Stonewielder, that whole idea that everyone comes back to do something right that they turned away from too early, and now they have to do it right. I mean, it's basically what It by Stephen King also does, but in a different way, right? Anyway, we have him trying to do good. He's forced into that army of Bennett, who is trying to do something, religious reform, and so forth. We'll go into that in a second. Because he sees how woefully unprepared the whole thing is. It's basically a children's crusade, sort of, and he, as someone with experience, is against his idea, but to do something good, which he believes, because he's a moral creature, right? He is So they're back. He's kind of forced to do the thing that he doesn't want to do, which is train them as warriors so they have a chance to survive. And that's how he'll slowly be drawn in again into what he really doesn't want to do. So that's something to keep in mind, and, Ivana is just a really cool character, and a likable one. Also, pacifist Toblikai are pretty fucking cool. And, yeah, for a second, let's look at the conversation, or the thoughts with Benneth, and how all of that works. What do I mean by that? Ivana thinks about the fact that he has seen this before, reform movements, crusades, millennial movements, and so forth. This is something that any organized religion will have to deal with from time to time. We have seen that in our history. Obviously, there have been movements of especially millennialism when you see people, when you're average people, when they have economic problems and whatnot, and they realize that the organized religion is falling away from those original principles, because any organized religion will do that over time. That's right. You become settled in hierarchies, in structures. You become more wealthy because hierarchies accrue wealth over time, and the poor people on the ground will notice that, and at some point they will believe, if the right people show up with them, maybe one or two really educated true believers or fanatics, they will realize that there is room for reform, which is what leads to heresy in a way. When you look at, say, the 12th and 13th century, the Waldensian movement, well, maybe the Cathars as well, but not so much. But the Waldensian, for example, and then you have the same in, say, 15th century with the Hussites in Czech Republic, what is now Czech Republic in Bohemia at the time, or with John Wycliffe in England, and then obviously the overall Reformation of Martin Luther and Zwingli and so forth. It's always the same kind of thing, that idea that something that has had a huge impact, and it only works if you have something like a state religion. Otherwise, it doesn't really work, because there's too many separate ideas and beliefs and whatnot. But if you have something like a state religion, or like a monolithic church, like the Catholic Church, say here, for example, in my examples that I just put out, or in this case, the Church of the Blessed Lady, that's when your overall pressures of society, your economic pressures, your political pressures, all of that will focus on that one thing and seek for reform there in a most violent way sometimes. And, how that works out really depends on how that church or whatever religious power reacts. And we'll talk about that later on tomorrow, I guess, or maybe the day after. It would be interesting to look at in a general things like how the Church of the Blessed Lady compares to the crusades against heretics in medieval Europe. Something to think about. But until then, I'll leave you to whatever you are doing. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment if you've read it, if you have opinions and whatnot, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about more Stonewielder. Until then, cheers.